It all began with a young boy clutching a gnarled stick, bellowing to the heavens that he was a mighty wizard. He was locked in combat with a playmate who dutifully mimicked a ferocious magical beast for him to conquer. Brandishing his makeshift staff with flair, the boy braced himself to unleash his ultimate, devastating strike. Without a shred of hesitation, he delivered a sharp crack to his friend's skull with the wooden rod. While the girl wailed about the genuine pain, the boy stubbornly insisted that a true wizard must ruthlessly strike down all magical beasts. Intrigued, the girl declared her own wizardly ambitions, but the boy coldly rejected her as an old man watched the scene unfold from the shadows. Just then, the elder named Labos stepped forward, remarking on the relentless energy the children possessed that morning. The duo scrambled toward him, desperate to learn the path of the mage, but the old man warned them that such a journey was far from simple. He explained that mages stand at the very zenith of humanity, governing society with the absolute authority of inherited power. The elder lamented that, unfortunately, the path was barred to them, until a young man suddenly cut him off with a sharp challenge. The youth pressed him on whether the dark rumors were true, drawing a curious and lingering gaze from the old man. The man demanded to know if it was true. Had a dreaded magical beast finally manifested within their territory? With a grim expression, Labos confirmed the nightmare, sending a chilling wave of terror through the gathered villagers. The elder described a gargantuan leopard cloaked in abyssal darkness that had been sighted lurking at the village outskirts. A mother desperately consoled her trembling daughter, noting that the village chief had already raced to the city to petition a mage for aid. The villagers clung to a fleeting sense of relief, praying the monstrous predator would soon be purged from their lands. The mother then issued a stern warning to her child, forbidding her from entering the woods to ensure she wouldn't become the beast's next meal. The old man reinforced the danger, stating it was sheer suicide to confront such a calamity without the intervention of a mage. The same young man asked if this dire news had spread to every corner of the village, and the elder nodded in solemn confirmation. The youth then inquired about that boy, but the old man's face remained blank, unable to place the person in question. The man clarified he was speaking of the boy perched upon the hill, as the scene shifts to a lone shepherd named Turin. He lay sprawled amidst the swaying grass, seemingly indifferent to the world. A mask of profound boredom etched his features as he rested beside his oblivious flock of sheep. That year, the young man lamented that his existence was utterly stagnant, devoid of even a spark of excitement. He had grown resentful of the monotonous landscape that greeted his eyes every single day. He felt trapped in a soul-crushing cycle of repetition where novelty had gone to die. The shepherd feared that if the silence persisted, he might eventually lose the very ability to speak. Suddenly, a voice branding him a pitiful child shattered his internal monologue and snapped him back to reality. It was old man Labos, scolding the shepherd for his blatant display of lethargy and sloth. However, the young man merely grunted, complaining that the old man's towering shadow was interfering with his precious rest. The elder barked that he was insolent, questioning if the boy was still nursing a bitter grudge from years ago. The youth vividly recalled how the old man had sharkishly tried to seize his flock the moment his mother had passed away. Driven by that betrayal, he refused to show even a shred of generosity regarding his hard-won inheritance. Turin commanded the elder to get to the point, leaving Labos fuming at the boy's sheer audacity and lack of respect. But the shepherd merely met his fury with a cold, piercing gaze that dared the old man to continue. Relenting, the elder revealed that a magical beast had emerged, causing the young man to bolt upright in genuine shock. The old man detailed a leopard as massive as a manor, claiming he had rushed there specifically to warn him of the impending doom. Labos was stunned into silence when he realized the shepherd didn't look frightened in the slightest. He couldn't fathom the youth's reckless courage, yet he begrudgingly warned him to stay vigilant regardless. The elder insisted his visit was born of pure concern, but the shepherd instantly branded him a silver-tongued liar. The shepherd accused him of only fretting over the livestock rather than his life, a jab that sent the old man into a fit of rage. The young man then dismissed the elder, telling him to vanish if he had finished his useless prattle. He delivered a final insult, claiming the old man's breath was so putrid it was causing his very nose to rot in disgust. The elder stormed off in a huff while the protagonist calmly ran a hand through the wool of one of his sheep. Left to the silence, the young shepherd's mind began to race with thoughts of the beast that now haunted their woods. It was common knowledge that magical beasts were the faunal equivalents of mages, capable of wielding the raw power of mana. A surge of adrenaline hit him at the prospect of a mage arriving. He would finally witness a master of the mystic arts with his own eyes. He harbored doubts that a high-ranking mage would answer a backwater village's call, yet his curiosity remained piqued. He wondered exactly what kind of overwhelming power such a legendary figure would truly wield. Suddenly, the shepherd's nostrils flared as a foreign, unsettling scent drifted on the wind, capturing his absolute attention. Startled, the young man's instincts flared as he realized the grim nature of that metallic scent. Scanning the horizon, he concluded that the breeze was carrying the unmistakable, heavy stench of fresh blood. As twilight bled into the sky, he ventured into the dense thicket to uncover the source of the carnage. He navigated the treacherous dirt path with predatory focus, tracking the crimson trail deeper into the wild. The shepherd moved with grim certainty, convinced that he was closing in on a horrific discovery. The iron-like odor became suffocatingly pungent as he neared the heart of the forest. Suddenly, the young man recoiled in horror as he stumbled upon a sight that froze the blood in his veins. He found Labos. The elder and the other villagers had been subjected to a mindless, brutal slaughter. The youth lamented in disbelief, never imagining that the source of such a foul stench would be Labos himself. Surveying the mangled remains, the shepherd realized no ordinary predator possessed such devastating, supernatural strength. He reached a chilling conclusion. This wasn't the work of a mere animal, but the wrath of a true magical beast. Suddenly, a guttural, unnatural sound shattered the silence, snapping the shepherd into a state of high alert. Then a colossal paw tipped with obsidian, razor-sharp talons slowly emerged from the oppressive shadows. A towering, abyssal monstrosity stepped forward, its very presence radiating a terrifying, primordial malice. The magical beast fully manifested, looming over the young shepherd like a shadow of impending death. The scene flashes back to the young boy, his voice trembling as he inquired about the true might of these monsters. His father's face darkened, explaining that 100 grown men wouldn't stand a ghost of a chance against such a calamity. Paralyzed by fear, the boy whispered a desperate question about the fate of their small village. But his father offered a sliver of hope, noting the chief had sought a mage to extinguish the threat. Clinging to that hope, the boy asked if a single mage truly possessed the power to slay such a nightmare. The man nodded solemnly, declaring that mages are transcendent beings born with the divine authority of magic. He added, with awe in his voice, that they could obliterate a magical beast with nothing more than a single, whispered command. Back in the present, the shepherd stood his ground against the titan, his eyes devoid of even a flicker of fear. With chilling calm, he uttered the word fall, an invisible, crushing weight slammed into the beast. The monster reeled in confusion, its primitive mind unable to comprehend why its body was suddenly betraying it. But the young man's form ignited with a violent, crimson aura as he scratched his head, realizing his opening gambit had lacked the necessary lethal force. He watched with a sigh as the creature remained standing. The beast let out a bone-chilling roar and lunged at the shepherd in a fit of primal, blind ferocity. Unfazed by the charging mountain of flesh, the protagonist commanded the beast to stop, in a heartbeat. The monster's massive frame was shredded into a spray of gore by a relentless, unseen force. The young man realized he couldn't restrain the lethality of his own strike, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Suddenly, the creature's remains pulsed with a sickly light, knitting back together as if time itself were reversing. With a deafening, thunderous roar, the monster proved that it was far from finished with this fight. Seizing the moment, the beast pounced, forcing the shepherd to execute a desperate leap to evade the crushing blow. Seeing his initial approach falter, he realized it was time to shift his tactics and get serious. The young man knelt, plucking a jagged stone from the earth and crushing it within his palm. He remarked that a shepherd should stick to what he knows best, preparing his trusty sling for a lethal encounter. As the gargantuan horror charged once more to claim his life, the young man infused the stone with his burgeoning mana, commanding the pebble to harden into an unbreakable projectile. With the stone now glowing with enchanted lethality, he whirled his sling, the air whistling in protest. His eyes ignited with a piercing golden radiance as he locked onto his target with absolute precision. The shepherd ordered the stone to accelerate, swinging the sling with such velocity that it became a blur of motion. He anchored his feet into the dirt, channeling the entire momentum of his body into one singular, devastating throw. Finally, the young man unleashed a final, absolute command. Pierce. The pebble streaked through the air at a godlike speed, trailing a brilliant streak of azure energy. The magical bullet cut through the atmosphere, a homing missile aimed directly at the monster's skull. Stripped of any chance to evade, the creature took the full brunt of the perfectly calculated strike. Upon impact, a violent eruption of crimson mist sprayed into the forest air, painting the trees in gore. The stone tore through the beast's reinforced skull as if it were mere parchment, continuing its flight into the distance. With its brain incinerated, the massive predator finally collapsed into the dirt. Its reign of terror ended forever. The scene rewinds, capturing the beast's final, desperate lunge as it aims a lethal strike at the shepherd. But with a confident, razor-sharp smirk, the youth had already calculated the perfect trajectory for his counterblow. And just like that, the enchanted pebble tore through the air, hurtling toward the gargantuan horror looming above. The target was the monster's skull, and the projectile found its mark with unerring precision, delivering a catastrophic impact. Shattering bone and sinew, the stone didn't just hit, it punched clean through the beast and vanished into the distance. The protagonist remained motionless as the massive, lifeless husk of the creature collapsed in a heap of dust behind him. He dryly remarked that this was his first time testing his true strength against a creature of mana. The shepherd stared at the rotting carcass, debating whether to simply hurl the remains off a nearby cliff. With an annoyed grunt, he grumbled that, in the end, he was basically doing the ungrateful villagers a massive favor. Then, a lingering close-up of his piercing eyes reveals the hidden truth. He is, in fact, a mage of incredible power. A flashback unfolds as the young man recalls the moment he first awakened his supernatural gifts 8 years ago. At only 10 years old, he began experimenting, making every object in the house dance and hover through the air. Bubbling with innocent joy, the boy called out to his mother, eager to show off the firewood he had made to fly. But his mother appeared in the doorway with a face of stone, clearly horrified by the spectacle before her. He boasted to her that he could command the very fire and wind. Memories of that fateful day still burned into his mind. His mother's scream shattered his excitement. It was the only time he had ever seen her consumed by such raw fury and fear. Young Turin stood frozen, unable to comprehend his mother's panic as she scrambled to gather the floating wood. The woman knelt before him, her voice trembling as she told him they needed to have a very serious conversation. She asked if he wished to stay by her side for a long, peaceful life, and the boy nodded with earnest devotion. To ensure his safety, his mother forced him to swear a solemn oath never to invoke that power again. The woman also strictly forbade him from ever displaying his gifts in the presence of another living soul. Confused, the boy asked why, and she reminded him of the ancient, blood-soaked legends of nobles and knights. With a grim expression, the young man reflects on the weight of the words she spoke to him that day. She explained that nobles are the heirs of the lords who save humanity, and that knights were forged from their lineage. The mother praised her son for his sharp memory regarding her tales, revealing the harsh truth behind the hierarchy, that nobles and knights are treated as a separate, superior caste, even among the elite ranks of mages. She then dropped a bombshell. The young man's power was a direct inheritance from his father, a legendary knight. Coupled with that revelation, the woman warned him that death would follow if anyone ever discovered he was a mage. With a fragile smile, she begged her son to promise that he would guard this secret with his very life. Returning to the present, the shepherd notes that 8 years have passed, and he has never once wavered from his vow. Gazing out from his cabin, he asserts that this sacred promise is one he will never, ever break. The protagonist reaffirms to himself that he has absolutely no desire to reveal his true identity to the world. He has no interest in descending the mountain or abandoning the sanctuary of his solitary, quiet life. Suddenly, the young man's peace is shattered by a cacophony of aggressive noises erupting outside his home. Fists begin pounding violently against his door as voices shout his name, demanding that he show his face. Baffled by the intrusion, the shepherd swings the door open to confront the source of the chaos. Outside, a mob of villagers stood waiting, their faces twisted with a toxic mix of grief and blind fury. Yawning with casual indifference, the protagonist asks the angry crowd exactly what they want from him. In an instant, a man accused him of murdering Labos, while another villager lunged forward and seized him by the collar, viciously labeling him a heartless, shameless brat. The man roared with rage, accusing the youth of using the helpless old man as human bait to distract the monster. Despite the suffocating tension, the shepherd remained eerily calm as the man's grip tightened on his clothes. The young man saw right through them. This mob was simply desperate for a scapegoat to blame for their own tragedy. He realized that pinning the disaster on him was the easiest path for these cowards who had spent the night hiding. With a cold smile, our hero remarked that they were just trying to dodge the blame before anyone pointed a finger at them. The man lost all reason and lunged at him, screaming the protagonist's name with a voice dripping with pure hatred. But with a fluid, effortless motion, the boy slipped the punch without breaking his composure. As he evaded the clumsy strike, The youth mused that magic was certainly a convenient tool for handling such pests. The young man then countered with a precise, staggering blow, proving he wasn't a victim they could easily bully. He reflected that if one desires a result with enough intensity, it becomes reality. All it costs is a bit of mana. With a gaze of cold steel, the young man whispered a solitary command, ordaining his attacker to fall. The aggressor tripped over thin air and face-planted into the dirt, utterly bewildered by his own sudden clumsiness. Though swarmed by the mob, the shepherd drifted through the chaos like a ghost as every desperate strike aimed at him whistled through empty space. He maintained a facade of normalcy, subtly weaving his hidden arts just enough to evade detection while neutralizing the threat. Brandishing a simple wooden staff, he expertly parried the onslaught, punishing anyone foolish enough to breach his personal space. Moving with the fluid grace of a seasoned predator, our hero dominated the fray, dropping another villager with a single clinical strike. He continued to systematically dismantle the unruly neighbors who had the audacity to trespass upon his sanctuary. Inexplicably, the sturdy handles of their farm tools snapped like dry twigs the moment they grazed the protagonist's skin. The entire group was sent sprawling into the weeds, leaving the young man to reflect on 8 years of living as a wolf among sheep. Finally, the hidden mage glared down at the broken man, declaring that he had spent nearly a decade suppressing his true nature. The youth dryly suggested they redirect their misplaced rage toward organizing a proper burial for the fallen Labos. Just then, a cluster of village women appeared. He warily asked if they too sought a fight, but one stepped forward, stating they only wished to lay eyes upon him, a revelation that left the normally stoic shepherd momentarily stunned into silence. He curtly ordered them to drag the unconscious fools away before retreating into the solitude of his home. The young man mused that venturing into the village would be a nightmare, certain they would use this chaos to swindle him on market prices. But he remained indifferent, deciding that if they dared to try his patience, he would simply deliver another brutal lesson. He calculated that the savage thrashing he'd just administered would be sufficient to keep the vultures at bay for a while. Suddenly, another sharp rap echoed against the door, making the shepherd wonder if the villagers had truly lost their survival instincts. The knocking was heavy and rhythmic, the unmistakable sound of someone who was not to be trifled with. Seething with irritation, the young man wrenched the door open, demanding to know which of them was eager for a trip to the infirmary. Instead of a villager, he found a rugged, bearded stranger clad in weathered traveler's gear, meeting his glare with a steady gaze. The outsider offered a polite apology, inquiring if he might find temporary shelter as he journeyed through these remote lands. The protagonist froze, the word journey stirring a long-dormant spark in his mind as he sheepishly apologized for his hostile greeting, explaining he had just finished dealing with a pack of particularly tiresome pests. He recalled his mother's teachings on hospitality, though he rarely found the villagers worthy of such refined etiquette. Intrigued by the anomaly, he noted the heavy blade strapped to the man's side, sensing an aura far different from the locals. With a faint smile, the youth welcomed him inside, his curiosity piqued by the arrival of a true swordsman in this backwater region. He sighed while scrutinizing the uninvited guest. The shepherd remarked that if the man was searching for an established inn, then he had wandered into the wrong neck of the woods. The scene shifts to a table laden with a humble feast, revealing that the youth had invited the warrior to share a meal. The host gestured toward the spread, modestly mentioning that his pantry offered little in the way of luxury. However, the traveler was visibly impressed by the fare and even more stunned to realize the boy had never encountered a soul from the outside world. The young man explained that he was a product of these hills, having never once stepped beyond the boundaries of his elevated domain. The swordsman watched him with calculating intensity while taking a slow pull from a rustic wooden cup. On the opposite side of the table, the shepherd matched his composure, calmly savoring his own drink. Suddenly, the guest broke the silence, complimenting the young man on his impeccable posture and refined bearing. He observed that for a simple mountain shepherd, the boy possessed the etiquette of a high-born noble. The protagonist credited his late mother for his upbringing, noting with a twinge of sorrow that she had passed years ago. The man replied that she had clearly raised a remarkable son and expressed hope that her soul found peace in the afterlife. The young man offered a quiet thanks, stating he merely lived according to the virtues his mother had instilled in him. Probing further, the youth asked what business brought a warrior to such isolation. The man revealed he was there on a high-stakes contract. His mission was to hunt down a predatory leopard-class magical beast that had been terrorizing the province. The authorities were scouring the land for a champion capable of extinguishing the monstrous threat. The shepherd realized this was the very mage the village chief had desperately sought, and the man nodded in confirmation. The elite hunter then requested permission to ask a question of his own, which the young man granted with a simple nod. The guest admitted he could taste the beast's lingering aura nearby, yet the creature was curiously absent from the physical world. Furthermore, the shepherd's unnerving lack of fear had fueled his growing suspicions about the boy's true identity. The village chief had described a reign of terror, yet here sat a lone youth, completely unruffled by the proximity of death. He pointed out that if the predator were on a human hunt, a lone shepherd would have been its primary target. Finally, the mage locked eyes with him, asking point-blank if he knew the meaning of fear, as a haunting memory surged to the surface of the shepherd's mind. His mother's voice had trembled as she asked him who he truly believed himself to be. The young Turin had countered, demanding to know why his identity as a mage had to remain a buried secret. His mother sighed, explaining that knights were nothing more than the hounds shepherds kept to police the flock. They might be fed and treated like kin, but the moment they are no longer useful, they are sold or slaughtered without a second thought. The woman confessed she refused to let her son become a sacrificial pawn, begging him to remain hidden by her side. In that moment, she bound him to a solemn vow, ensuring he would never disregard her dire warning. She cautioned that if a rival mage ever sensed his spark, they would tear his life apart and reduce him to a mindless tool. She went even further, whispering that to protect his existence, he might one day be forced to silence someone forever. Back in the present, the shepherd felt a chill as he realized the confrontation his mother feared had finally arrived. The guest demanded a confession, and for a split second, the young man's irises ignited with a lethal golden radiance. The swordsman watched the shift in stony silence, but the tension snapped when the mage suddenly chuckled, noting that with such a stern face, the boy had completely sucked the life out of his joke. The protagonist stood blinking in confusion, struggling to process what kind of twisted humor the man was attempting. He offered a stiff apology for his lack of wit, but the traveler waved it off with a hearty, dismissive gesture. The mage laughed, claiming such a shocked reaction was only natural for a boy's first encounter with high-level mage humor. Realizing their manners had slipped, the guest beamed and extended a weathered hand in a formal gesture of peace. He declared it a genuine honor to make his acquaintance, his eyes crinkling as he waited for a reciprocal handshake. The youth introduced himself as Jiran, an 18-year-old shepherd, and firmly grasped the stranger's hand. The two shared a proper greeting, finally bridging the gap of suspicion that had hung between them. The mage casually mentioned he had seen 75 winters, leaving the shepherd floored by his remarkably youthful appearance. The guest noted that mana slows the ticking clock of aging, prompting Jiran to ask how a man of his stature became a nomad. He revealed he had dedicated 65 years of service to the prestigious Arabian line and now simply wished to wander during his twilight years. With a nostalgic smile, the mage painted a romantic picture of his travels, eager to impart his wisdom to the young man. The shepherd found himself smiling back, genuinely intrigued by the tales the elder was prepared to weave. Seeing the boy's interest, the guest's grin widened, casting a warm and uncharacteristically friendly glow over the cabin. As the conversation flowed, the young man marveled at the realization that he was actually having the time of his life. The hours dissolved into stories and laughter until the first pale rays of dawn began to pierce the morning mist. Startled by the sun, the mage remarked that the night had vanished in a heartbeat and announced his immediate departure. He placed a heavy handful of silver coins on the table, noting they were minted from the purest, most refined ore. Jiran gathered the silver and wished him a successful hunt, but the man scoffed at the idea of a final farewell. The traveler joked with a wink that he might just double back soon to settle his tab with another free meal. The following morning, the shepherd led his woolly charges back to the emerald slopes to graze as he always did. The sheep wandered contentedly, basking in the golden sunlight as a rare, genuine smile touched Jiran's lips. The young man gave a sharp whistle to rally the flock. At the sound, a lead sheep instantly broke its feast to lock eyes with its master. With perfect discipline, the entire herd converged around the young shepherd in the center of the sun-drenched meadow. He reflected on the anomaly of the previous night, his first meeting with another mage and the most he had spoken in years. Gently stroking a sheep's wool, he replayed the warmth and sincerity he had sensed in the old man's voice. Jiran concluded that out of every adult he had ever encountered, this wandering mage was the only one with a truly noble soul. Left to the silence of the hills, he pondered his mother's words, how knights were merely the nobility's well-groomed hunting dogs. The shepherd wondered how the hunt fared, knowing full well there wasn't a single magical beast left alive on his Arrow Hill. Simultaneously, the mage trekked through the dense tree-line, perturbed by the eerie lack of monstrous activity. He found the silence deafening, a nagging instinct telling him that the stories he'd been told didn't match the reality of the forest. The guest discovered clear evidence of a violent struggle, yet the lingering scent of a living creature was nowhere to be found. He traced a gouge in a nearby trunk, wondering if some unknown hunter had already claimed the beast's head. The man puzzled over who could have possibly finished the job, and if the village chief had secretly hired a rival behind his back. Despite the mystery, the swordsman felt a weight lift, believing the most important thing was that the threat had been neutralized. Suddenly, a wave of pure, distorted mana washed over him, and his relieved expression vanished into a mask of dread. Startled, the man whirled around, his hand flying to his hilt as a suffocating, malevolent presence closed in. At that moment, a massive, twisted limb tipped with obsidian claws tore through the shadows directly in front of him. The horror finally stepped into the light, a grotesque, undead nightmare of the very beast that had once terrorized the village. He then recoiled in horror, realizing it was a corpse puppet, a macabre marionette crafted from the monster's own rotting remains. Paralyzed by shock, the man wondered what kind of twisted soul would commit such a gruesome, forbidden act. With no time for contemplation, the gargantuan horror lunged, aiming to pulverize him with its spectral shadow claws. With a blur of motion, the mage evaded the strike as the monster's blow carved a desolate crater into the bedrock. He muttered that such aberrations occur when mana is haphazardly surged, a mistake no self-respecting mage would ever make. The guest took to the skies, retaliating by blasting the corpse puppet with a searing torrent of raw, arcane energy. He was certain a fellow mage had felled the beast, yet he couldn't fathom why they would leave such a volatile curse behind. He dismissed the notion of a novice knight, knowing no amateur could slay this titan, while frantically conjuring a massive fireball. A dark thought crossed his mind. Did the person responsible have some other, more sinister objective in play? Regardless of the mystery, he had to end this nightmare now, bracing himself to strike with every ounce of his remaining strength. The man unleashed a titanic beam of concentrated energy at the shadow creature, but to his absolute horror, the corpse puppet moved with unnatural fluidity, completely nullifying his magical onslaught as if it were nothing. Stunned, the mage realized with a sinking heart that the beast's mana density far eclipsed his own. Suddenly, the creature dissolved into the treeline, leaving him disoriented and vulnerable in the shifting shadows. He sensed the monster was gathering mana for a lethal counterattack and desperately scanned the dark woods for any movement. In that silent heartbeat, the enemy's jagged shadow stealthily loomed directly behind the unsuspecting mage. The monstrosity erupted from the darkness, lashing out with a barbed, spiked tail that left him zero time to react. The man took the full brunt of the blow, his arm shattering under the force of the devastating impact. He gritted his teeth, realizing this was a calamity that no ordinary knight could ever hope to survive. The sheer momentum sent him hurtling through the air, leaving him broken and rolling across the jagged forest floor. Sprawled in the dirt, he lamented that he never expected to encounter a high-tier horror of this magnitude in such a remote corner. As the creature loomed over him, the mage closed his eyes, wondering if this was truly the final chapter of his journey. But with a defiant, bloodied smirk, the old swordsman decided he wouldn't embrace the grave without a final struggle. He refused to yield, vowing to drag the creature into the abyss with him if that was what it took to win. The man channeled the very embers of his soul, concentrating all his mana into his palm for one last suicidal strike. Simultaneously, the creature coiled its muscles for the kill, ready to snuff out his life once and for all. The mage focused his fading vision, waiting for the split second of an opening to unleash his absolute power. Without a shred of hesitation, he ignited his aura and flew toward the monster to meet his fate head-on. Suddenly, a flicker of brilliant blue light ignited in the heart of the forest, drawing every eye to its radiant glow. Out of nowhere, a violent bolt of azure lightning sliced through the canopy, impaling the creature just before it could execute the old man. The traveler gasped in disbelief as the lethal intervention arrived from the shadows, sparing his life at the ultimate second. Under the crushing weight of the mysterious blow, the monster was slammed into the earth and finally ceased its unholy twitching. Dazed and gasping for air, the old man looked up to hear a familiar, calm voice asking if he was all right. He realized the savior was none other than the young shepherd himself, standing tall and looking down at him with an eerily serene expression. Walking leisurely down the blood-stained path, the protagonist approached his guest as the suffocating tension began to dissolve. The old swordsman's eyes bulged as the impossible truth hit him, and he stammered, asking if the boy was actually a high-level mage in disguise. Though reeling, The veteran questioned why the youth had maintained such a humble facade during their entire evening together. The man demanded to know why the boy chose to intervene, given he could have easily vanished into the mountains without a trace. The young man offered a small, knowing smile and began to reveal his true motives to his bewildered new companion. The scene transitions to a peaceful memory, where a loyal hound rests quietly on the floorboards of the youth's cabin. The two had discussed the weight of existence while the pet slumbered contentedly at their feet. The young man had remarked that with the guest's formidable prowess, he could have amassed a fortune serving a wealthier lord. Curious, the hero asked what was so tragic about the villager's plight that compelled a master like him to feel such pity. Sighing, the veteran explained that these commoners live in a state of constant peril, defenseless against the cruel whims of a world they don't understand. Hearing this, the young shepherd pondered the heavy burden of mages, who inherit the power of gods only to be chained to their own destinies. The old man beamed with pride, stating he found his purpose in shielding the helpless, even if his more arrogant peers disagreed. The protagonist signaled that he had taken the lesson to heart, a look of quiet satisfaction settling on his face. He mused that in this vast, chaotic world, every soul possesses their own conviction and a unique path to walk. In the present, the shockwave of the final blow rippled through the woods, purging the forest of the evil presence for good. Recovering his strength, the mage urged them to move quickly, warned that they were dealing with a power on an entirely different plane of existence. He urgently explained that only a high-ranking noble could vanquish such a horror, imploring the youth to flee and alert the village chief. The swordsman braced himself to face the monstrosity alone, intending to sacrifice his life to buy the boy a few precious seconds. But internally, the veteran conceded his bravado was a mere facade. He had no idea how long he could withstand such overwhelming malice. Suddenly, the shepherd cut him off with a calm indifference, telling him to steady his nerves because the situation was under control. The youth remarked that if his previous strike had found its mark, they would be fine, just as a jagged stone began to pulse with an eerie light. The swordsman stood paralyzed with shock, gasping as he realized the young man had been suppressing his true, terrifying potential all along. In that moment, the veteran knight, CEO Roni, understood that their meeting was no mere coincidence of the road. A cluster of heavy boulders began to hover defiantly in the air, vibrating with a surge of volatile, azure energy. The protagonist fully unleashed his dormant aura, proving beyond a doubt that he was far more than some common runaway knight. With a predatory smirk, the young man confessed that he was actually eager to discover the true ceiling of his power. Haloed by floating monoliths, the young mage prepared to go head-to-head with the colossal shadow abomination. Flashing a confident grin, the youth admitted he was curious to see just how far his boundaries could be pushed in a real fight. However, the elder knight bellowed a warning, refusing to let the boy face such a catastrophic opponent single-handedly. He scrambled to join the fray, but the monster had already lunged, its shadow claws swiping at the protagonist with lethal intent. Without a shred of hesitation, the shepherd discharged a devastating beam of blue energy that tore through the very atmosphere. The old veteran realized with a sinking heart that he could barely track the boy's movements. He was now a mere spectator in a titan's duel. Acknowledging his current helplessness, he slowly lowered his glowing hand and retreated from the direct line of fire. The veteran mage decided that his new purpose was to guide this raw, unpolished diamond and help his talent truly reach its zenith. At that precise moment, the hero erupted with an overwhelming burst of mana, the shockwave literally devouring a massive swath of the forest. Despite the destruction, the young man clicked his tongue in frustration, annoyed that his opening gambit hadn't been more decisive. He attempted a swift kick, but his leg passed harmlessly through the monster's ethereal form as if striking smoke. The swordsman shouted in a panic that physical blows were useless against the phantom's spectral body as the creature bore down on them. The shepherd glanced back, calmly inquiring how one goes about killing something that isn't entirely solid. The elder roared that only the purifying element of fire would work, and as the boy reached out, the knight added that the young man could also harness the searing wrath of lightning to claim a total victory. A sudden pillar of flame engulfed the monster, yet the phantom seemed completely unfazed by the heat. The protagonist grumbled about the failure, but the old man countered that the raw power wasn't the problem. The mage explained that to truly inflict damage on a living soul, he had to establish a spiritual cause behind his magic. In that instant, the veteran was struck by a lightning bolt epiphany regarding the nature of the boy's power. He realized Turin had never actually learned to harvest mana, which was exactly why the slain beast had manifested into a vengeful phantom. The elder was staggered, The youth was already this monstrously powerful despite having never received a single day of formal training. He commanded the young man to manifest his internal fire and hurl it directly at the creature's core. He began to explain that while sparking fire is easy, true mastery requires decades of discipline. But to his utter disbelief, the young man manifested a perfect, roaring blaze instantly, without so much as a drop of sweat. Seizing the initiative, the protagonist stomped the earth, anchoring himself as he prepared for a final, decisive strike. He then hurled a massive, concentrated fireball with every ounce of his focus toward the shadow monster. The projectile slammed directly into the creature's eye, triggering a cataclysmic, fiery detonation that lit up the entire woods. The phantom's spectral form began to disintegrate, its very essence being greedily consumed by the magical inferno. The veteran barked at him to maintain his focus, urging him to keep pouring his mana into the hungry flames. He warned that unless every fiber of the phantom was incinerated, the nightmare would simply reform and rise again. With a gaze of absolute iron, the hero channeled his entire reservoir of strength into the vortex to finish the job. With one final roar of the flames, the monster was utterly erased by a violent, swirling cyclone of fire. As the embers settled and the silence returned, the veteran swordsman finally let out a jubilant cheer of victory. He remarked that it was an exceptionally high-tier phantom, a creature of absurdly lethal capabilities. And yet, this lone young shepherd had systematically dismantled the horror all on his own. The young man asked if the hunt was finally over, leaving the elder mage in complete awe of his casual strength. The knight warned that he must now absorb the lingering mana, or he would risk birthing yet another phantom from the remains. When the youth asked for the method, the veteran told him to close his eyes and visualize draining the very life force from the air. Following the instruction, the protagonist centered himself, focusing his will on the invisible energy saturating the clearing. A luminous stream of emerald energy began to spiral from the creature's ashes, flowing directly into the young man's body. With a sharp exhale, the youth drew the emerald mana into his palm, his focus sharpening into a razor's edge. His irises ignited with a brilliant, supernatural glow, mirroring the radioactive hue of the energy saturating his veins. The raw mana surged through his circuit for the first time, illuminating his internal pathways like a map of constellations. The veteran knight was utterly paralyzed by the spectacle, his mind reeling at the impossible feat unfolding before his eyes. He had warned the boy of the overwhelming sensory overload, yet the shepherd looked transfixed by the sheer euphoria of the power. The warrior stammered, asking if this was truly his first time taming the world's essence, and the youth gave a grim nod. The swordsman explained that mana typically trickles in over years, and the swiftest evolution comes from plundering it from others. But since this was the boy's maiden absorption, it meant his inherent potential was on a plane far beyond mortal comprehension. He concluded that the young shepherd was a freak of nature, a realization that caused a heavy, suffocating tension to fill the air. The mage called out the boy's name, his voice cutting through the thick, awkward silence like a blade. He lowered his head in a formal bow, pleading to know which legendary noble household had sired such a monster. The shepherd barked the man's name in return, a sound that made the veteran snap to attention and stare in disbelief. He bluntly told the man to tend to his gore-slicked wounds first, finally forcing the mage to acknowledge his mangled arm. Later, inside the dim cabin, the swordsman sat with his limbs scrubbed clean and bound in tight, professional bandages. Resting at the worn table, the man offered a sincere apology for his earlier insolence and for dragging a civilian into a deathmatch. But the protagonist scoffed, insisting he was a nobody, just a nameless shepherd who didn't even know the face of his father. He commanded the mage to drop the groveling formalities, and seeing the iron resolve in the boy's eyes, the man finally relented. The veteran then pressed him. Why would a mage of his caliber choose a life of dirt and wool? The boy revealed it was his mother's dying wish, a desperate, final plea she had made before the cold earth claimed her years ago. He recounted her warning, that if the highborn ever caught wind of his gift, he would be forged into a disposable weapon of war. The veteran whispered that his mother possessed the wisdom of a prophet, leaving the boy blindsided by the unexpected praise. He admitted the woman's fears were justified, even if the shepherd had always dismissed them as the ramblings of an overprotective parent. The man explained that the staggering power of a mage is a magnet for bloodletting, citing the catastrophic noble wars of 25 years past. Images of the slaughter between the Arabian and Zaha houses flickered in his mind, a conflict where thousands were fed to the crows. Out of the 3,000 elite knights who rode for the Arabian banner, Over 900 were butchered in those horrific, violent clashes. The man's voice broke as he recalled that every friend and mentor he held dear was among the third who never returned. He remembered with haunting clarity how his entire lineage was erased by the enemy, leaving him as a ghost wandering the ruins. The nomad added a grim truth. A warrior's life is a candle flickering in a storm, snuffed out far faster than any commoner's. However, he pointed out that his mother was dead wrong about one thing: his talent, leaving the hero narrowed-eyed and curious. The guest admitted he was a master of the blade, yet he watched the youth dismantle a high-tier phantom with terrifying ease. He declared that the shepherd's ceiling was noble tier, perhaps even occupying the apex of the world's most gifted talents. The protagonist fell into a pensive silence, the weight of the veteran's prophecy regarding his future hanging heavy in the room. The youth then questioned if the story of his father being a mere knight was a fabrication, prompting the man to explain rare magical anomalies. The veteran then made a bold suggestion. The boy needed to abandon this hill and witness the true scale of the world. The shepherd asked for a reason, and the elder replied that humanity was drowning and desperately needed protectors to reclaim the wildlands. But the man quickly bit his tongue, realizing the boy was still a fledgling who understood nothing of the arcane laws. He explained that bloodline traits are echoes of ancient, godlike ancestors, the very things that carve the world into rigid social castes. The mage then probed, asking if any spells felt unervingly natural or if he possessed instincts that functioned without mana. The hero wondered if it was purely the mana's influence that granted him his freakish, supernatural physical strength. Finally, the youth mentioned his preternatural sense of smell, and the man nodded. A refined nose was a hallmark of a specific bloodline. The elder noted that prowess with throwing weapons was a trademark of the Arabian house, though it was common enough to be a coincidence. The shepherd urged the man to finish his assessment, and the veteran steeled himself to divulge the remaining secrets. But the youth caught a sudden shift in the guest's aura and called out to him, sensing a brewing storm. The swordsman's face went deathly pale, and the protagonist demanded to know the cause of his sudden, chilling change in demeanor. With a gaze that pierced through the boy, the elder declared he finally recognized which noble house his abilities mirrored. The young man demanded a name, but the veteran's expression remained shrouded in a dark, heavy mystery. The mage finally revealed that the shepherd's blood belonged to one of the kingdom's most feared and storied noble lineages, a clan known to the common folk and kings alike as the Great Hunters. At that moment, the man dropped the bombshell. It was the Zaha family, the blood-soaked rivals who had nearly annihilated the Arabians. Hearing this, the shepherd was struck dumb, his world spinning as the shocking revelation shattered his simple identity forever. The name of the rival clan resonated like a death knell in the young shepherd's mind, leaving him reeling from the earth-shattering revelation. He struggled to process the fact that his veins carried the notorious Jaha bloodline, the very lineage responsible for his companion's scars and sorrow. Staring at the veteran, the youth felt a chill, wondering if he was cursed with the same predatory instincts as the monsters of the previous war. In that heavy silence, the hero felt a surge of conflict, wondering if he should beg forgiveness for the sins of ancestors he had never known. Suddenly, the oppressive quiet snapped as the man called out to him, his voice remarkably calm and devoid of malice. Clapping a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, the traveler urged him to wipe that look of dread from his face. He gently reminded the youth that he was a stranger to the bloodbaths of the past, yet the shepherd still felt the crushing weight of a phantom guilt. With a weary but kind smile, the elder declared those were the burdens of a dead generation, and that clinging to old hatreds only ensures the cycle of pain never ends. The young man asked if the warrior harbored any lingering regrets, prompting the veteran to tilt his head in curiosity. Standing amidst the swaying grass of the meadow, the hero asked if he regretted encouraging a Jaha descendant to descend from his mountain sanctuary. The man explained that if the boy truly sought the pinnacle of power, a reunion with the Jaha clan was an inevitable destiny fueled by his freakish talent. Taken aback, the boy listened as the veteran expressed absolute faith in his character and the unshakable purity of his soul. The old man noted that the shepherd's true nature was revealed the moment he gambled his life's secret just to pull a stranger from the jaws of death. Gazing into the distance, the elder mused that a soul as righteous as the boy's might be the very key to preventing history from repeating its bloody patterns. The old man then forced a chuckle to lighten the mood, telling him not to overthink a destiny he hadn't even begun to write yet. The hero turned his gaze toward the horizon, his amber eyes hardening with a new, decisive clarity that eclipsed his former doubts. With a faint, determined smile, the protagonist declared that he had finally made his choice. He would leave the hill to witness the world's true scale. The veteran beamed at the boy's courage, but cautioned that a mage's departure must be calculated, not a reckless sprint into the unknown. In a display of his innate kindness, the shepherd insisted he wouldn't take a single step toward the valley until his friend's wounds were fully mended. Watching the boy through the window, the old man realized he was looking at a rare heart of gold, destined for a future of blinding brilliance. The veteran began their formal training, explaining that to command the world, one must master mana, the fundamental key to omnipotence. The shepherd pondered the word, but the mage cautioned that such power is never as simple or absolute as the legends claim. Intrigued, the youth asked about the laws governing the fusion of mana and magic, and the elder prepared to impart his hard-won wisdom. The swordsman held up 3 fingers, stating that every spell success is dictated by a trinity of bloodline, affinity, and causality. He started with bloodline, the genetic inheritance that grants nobles their unfair advantage from the moment of birth. He cited the Revista line of the South, who can stitch flesh and mend bone without a second of study. Because for them, miraculous healing isn't a skill, it's a biological reflex. Next, the hero inquired about affinity, which the veteran described as a soul's natural familiarity with a specific element. The young man caught on instantly, comparing it to how naturally he could manifest a fireball as if it were an extension of his own arm. The swordsman nodded, noting that without that affinity, a flame would lack the explosive velocity and searing heat the boy commanded. He then revealed the final, most esoteric pillar, causality, a concept so profound it still eluded even his veteran mind. The old man challenged him, asking what the boy thought would happen if he tried to strike a foe with raw, shapeless mana. He demonstrated that the result would be hollow and weak due to the lack of causality, using a simple cup of water as his canvas. As the water began to churn and boil, the mage explained that magic fails when there is no logical cause to trigger the desired effect. Watching the water bubble, the shepherd felt the gears in his mind shift as he finally grasped the abstract concept. The hero surmised that to truly fell an enemy, he needed to manifest a tangible cause, like the conjuring of a lethal flame. The veteran was visibly floored by the boy's intuition, joking that with a brain like that, he could have easily conquered the royal academies. But the youth grew puzzled, asking why such complex logic was needed for beasts when he could already command mundane animals with ease. The swordsman dropped his voice, revealing the terrifying variable, the volatile mana that circulates within magical beasts themselves. The protagonist realized then that a true master doesn't just wield mana as a weapon. They understand the very fabric of its existence. The youth asked if the Jaha line possessed a signature art, and the elder confirmed they were the realm's undisputed masters of the hunt and tracking. Sensing a challenge, the veteran dared him to awaken that dormant instinct, and the shepherd accepted without a moment's hesitation. He sank into a deep trance, commanding his very existence to slip through the cracks of reality, to become silent, scentless, and invisible. A thick, ethereal white mist began to pour from his pores as he focused his immense reservoir of energy into a single point. The elder knight watched with bated breath, wondering if the boy could actually pull it off. Then, in a blink, the seat before him was empty, leaving behind nothing but a fading shimmer of golden particles on the floorboards. Stunned, the swordsman exhaled in awe. The boy had vanished so completely that even a veteran's senses could no longer detect his presence. A wave of old tension gripped the man as he felt the chilling perfection of an ability he had once spent a lifetime fearing. The room felt hollow, the boy's presence entirely erased from the physical world. Then, with a sudden, radiant flash, the young mage rematerialized out of thin air, proving his first foray into high-level magic was a flawless success. The veteran remarked that such an invasive ability was a nightmare incarnate, a power whispered about in terror by the knights of Arabian. However, he cautioned that despite its lethal utility, invisibility is no absolute shield and carries its own set of fatal flaws. The elder offered to refine the boy's technique, but the youth questioned if it wasn't a tactical blunder to arm a potential future enemy. The knight pressed a hand to his chest, reminding the boy that he had already spared his life and meticulously tended to his battle scars. The old warrior reaffirmed his unshakable faith in the protagonist's soul as the scene shifts, and the village chief erupts in a frantic scream of disbelief upon learning the shepherd intends to liquidate his flock and vanish. Dressed for the open road, the hero towers over the sputtering chief, who wails about him abandoning the village without a single word of notice. The young mage offers a cold smile, questioning why he should seek permission from others to dispose of his own hard-earned property. He delivered an ultimatum. If they refused to pay a premium price, he would set every sheep loose and let the wilderness claim them. Terrified by the prospect of losing the livestock, the man previously thrashed by the hero begged the chief to settle the debt. The village chief gritted his teeth, knowing the shepherd was not one for empty threats and that he was utterly cornered. He reluctantly shoved a heavy pouch of silver into the young man's hand, sealing their final transaction. The chief told him to rot for all he cared, and the two travelers finally turned their backs on the village forever. As they walked, the shepherd noted the village still owed the mage a bounty and offered to squeeze the coins from him by force. But the veteran declined, insisting he wouldn't take a copper when the boy was the true architect of the beast's downfall. With a nod of mutual respect, the hero accepted the terms, and the pair continued their trek down the winding dirt path. Upon reaching the forest's edge, the swordsman announced that their shared journey had reached its natural conclusion. He apologized for the abrupt departure, explaining that his soul felt most at peace when wandering the world in solitude. The young man offered a respectful nod, voicing his gratitude for the invaluable lessons and the camaraderie they had shared. With a final, lingering smile, the knight gave his blessing and urged the protagonist to walk his path with unyielding strength. The youth watched him go, silently hoping that the tides of fate would one day bring their paths back together. For a long moment, the young man stood motionless, watching CEO Roni's silhouette dissolve into the distant morning mist. Only then did the hero truly grasp why he had forbidden the old man from using titles and formal honorifics. It was a deep-seated longing. He had spent his entire life yearning for the steady presence of a father figure. In that brief time, the knight had become the blueprint for the legendary man the protagonist dreamed of becoming. The scene transitions, tracing the young man's lonely footprints as they are swallowed by the shifting sands of a desolate wasteland. A howling gale tears across the jagged cliffs, dominating the scorched and unforgiving landscape. Cloaked and hooded, our hero navigates the vast, shimmering heat of that lethal desert expanse alone. He squinted through the biting dust and grit, pushing forward on a solitary pilgrimage across the dunes. Suddenly, a shape flickered on the horizon, making the young man wonder if a merchant caravan was traversing the wastes. Spotting a cluster of silhouettes against the haze, he hoped they might be a group of traveling traders. Relieved at the prospect of fresh water or a map, the young man decided to close the distance. He approached the group, intending to inquire about the shortest route to the sprawling city of Murai. But the leader of the pack barked a challenge, demanding to know what business a brat had obstructing their path. The man confirmed that the trail ahead led straight to Murai, a detail the hero noted with a calm nod. The youth offered his thanks and prepared to depart, ready to resume his trek through the burning sands. Suddenly, one of the men stepped into his path, blocking his exit and commanding him to stay exactly where he was. The man sneered, asking if the boy truly thought he could just extract information and walk away for free. He declared with a predatory grin that in this desert, every gift requires a blood tax or a heavy toll in return. At that signal, the entire group unsheathed their blades, surrounding the youth and ordering him to surrender his pack. The hero sighed as the reality set in. He hadn't found merchants, but a pack of bottom-feeding desert bandits. The bandit leader chuckled, noting that out here, the sun bleaches all bones equally, threatening to kill him if he didn't hand over his life savings. He added that a quick surrender would save everyone the messy trouble of a slaughter. The protagonist sensed the killing intent in the air. These weren't common thieves, but murderers who thrived on blood. A memory of his training with CEO Roni surged to the surface. The secret principles of causality burned in his mind, and the lethal methods required to forge mana into a weapon of absolute devastation. He realized these desert rats would serve as the perfect whetstone for the powers he had just begun to master. With a razor-sharp smirk, the young man whispered that they would be the first to experience his newly awakened arts. The bandits exchanged confused glances, unable to fathom why their prey was suddenly smiling at them. They erupted into mocking laughter, with one jeering that the kid was acting like he was some high and mighty mage. With a low hum of power in his palm, our hero prepared to unleash the true fury of a mage upon the scum. He conjured a violent atmospheric vortex, sending the brigands sprawling like autumn leaves against a hurricane. He noted that manipulating the natural winds was a masterstroke of efficiency, burning far less mana than creating a gale from nothing. Battered and broken on the scorched earth, the bandits gasped in disbelief, while even the youth marveled at his own blossoming lethality. Refusing to grant them a reprieve, he uncorked his water skin, weaving a new thread of magic to seal their fate. Under his absolute command, the harmless liquid froze into jagged, crystalline spears that hung suspended in the blistering heat. The protagonist manifested a phalanx of frozen death, ready to rain a glacial execution down upon the thieves. One bandit was paralyzed by a primal terror, witnessing the terrifying evolution of a monster in the skin of a boy. In a heartbeat, the ice spears shrieked forward, impaling the wretch as he collapsed into the sand, his life extinguished. He mused that while water-based sorcery was potent, a simple enchanted stone still delivered a far more visceral, bone-shattering impact. The bandit leader crashed to his knees, his bravado replaced by desperate pleas, howling that he never intended to cross a true mage. The remaining outlaws groveled in the dust, offering their stolen spoils as a blood sacrifice to spare their miserable lives. But our hero simply anchored his heel into the earth, his cold gaze signaling that their time for excuses had run out. He ignited his mana, erupting jagged stone pillars from the bedrock that surged toward the panicked survivors. With eyes wide with a final, soul-crushing horror, the bandit leader watched his world collapse into a tomb of stone. The carnage was absolute. The entire cutthroat crew was obliterated by the young mage's overwhelming elemental wrath. The hero loomed over the shivering leader, who promised to betray every secret just to cling to one more breath. He demanded to know why they attacked with such suicidal recklessness, oblivious to the fact that he was a predator. The youth was momentarily stunned when the bandit replied that his own humility had been his undoing. The leader confessed that because the young man was so soft-spoken and polite, they had marked him as a harmless, easy target. The young man offered a grim nod of thanks, realizing he had just received a masterclass in survival from a dying thief. A flicker of hope sparked in the leader's eyes as he begged to know if his honesty had earned him his life. But a single, heavy droplet of water hovered over his brow as the leader gasped out the protagonist's name one last time. A memory of that final night surfaced, where the veteran warned the shepherd that the world was crawling with two-legged wolves. The old knight had commanded him never to waste an ounce of mercy on those who feast upon the weak. The protagonist felt the weight of those words settle in his soul, finally understanding the grim necessity of his master's cold logic. He realized that sparing a murderer out of naive pity was a death sentence for a dozen more innocent souls. With an expression of iron, our hero concluded that he had lingered long enough among the dead and needed to press on. Following the rhythmic indentations of wagon tracks, the young man resumed his trek across the shifting golden dunes. As he walked, a profound and heavy realization began to crystallize within his mind for the very first time. He looked back at his own footprints, acknowledging that they were now stained with the weight of the lives he had taken. A pang of guilt tugged at his heart, but the echo of his master's warning provided a shield against the creeping remorse. He knew that predators who kill without a second thought would only return to spill more blood if left alive. Anchored by those harsh teachings, his turbulent heart finally found a grim peace as he pushed deeper into the unknown. After an arduous journey through the wastes, our hero finally emerged into a sprawling kingdom teeming with chaotic life. The young man stood transfixed by the vibrant tapestry before him, his senses reeling at the sheer scale of civilization. On the shimmering horizon, a gargantuan metropolis loomed, anchored by a colossal citadel that pierced the very clouds. A weathered sign confirmed his arrival. He had reached the gateway of the bustling trade city, Mirai. The protagonist was awestruck. He had never imagined so many souls could occupy a single corner of the earth. The towering, intricate architecture was worlds away from the humble hovels and dirt paths of his mountain home. Weaving through the cacophony of the market, the hero finally felt the electric pulse of a true, living metropolis. The young man stopped before a vibrant fruit stall, where the vendor greeted him with the practiced, loud enthusiasm of a salesman. But when the merchant pressed for a sale, the shepherd simply replied that he wasn't looking to fill his belly just yet. He recalled the veteran's parting advice to secure lodging and a safe harbor the moment he set foot in a city. Instantly, the vendor's smile curdled into a sneer, barking at the boy to move along if he wasn't spending coin, leaving our hero baffled by the sudden hostility. He wondered if there was some unspoken, metropolitan law that required a bribe of commerce before a simple question could be asked. Playing the game, the protagonist pointed to a pile of crimson apples and inquired about the price of the glistening fruit. The merchant spat out a price of 2 dupiat, narrowing his eyes as he sized up the dusty stranger before him. Hearing the cost, the youth began to sort through his coins, while the vendor slyly noted he was open to alternative methods of payment. With the transaction complete, the hero finally secured the location of a reputable inn and followed the merchant's finger deeper into the city. Following the trail of rumors, he arrived at the district's most prominent establishment, a bustling hybrid of a rowdy tavern and a traveler's dormitory. The moment he crossed the threshold, A vibrant young staffer named Lena greeted him with a radiant, disarming smile. The girl playfully hummed a compliment about the youth's striking features while he dryly inquired about the cost of a night sanctuary. She quoted a rate of 16 dupiat per night, and the hero accepted the terms instantly, eager to wash the desert dust from his skin. The traveler slid a heavy pouch of coins across the counter, noting he had a question of grave importance to ask her. The waitress scooped up the payment, her eyes gleaming with genuine curiosity as she leaned in to hear what the stranger sought. The shepherd leaned forward, asking if the local wilds were infested with any high-value monsters carrying a price on their heads. He calculated that he needed to cull these beasts, not just for the cold weight of gold, but to harvest their mana for his own ascension. Instead of answering, the girl stared at his gold in a heavy, pregnant silence, forcing the protagonist to demand why she had suddenly turned mute. Lena finally smirked, declaring that in this concrete jungle, information is a currency, before pointing him toward the local city hall. The waitress stifled a laugh, mockingly labeling him a clueless country bumpkin for never having heard of the government hub. She explained that the hall was the nerve center where officials dictated the laws and business of the local sovereign lord. The girl informed him the offices were likely shuttered for the night, advising him to be the first one at the gates come daybreak. Lena then eyed him suspiciously, asking if he was one of those monster hunters, a title the young man found utterly foreign. She whispered the popular legend that commoners could transcend their birthright and become mages through the hunt, asking if that was his true motive. The hero glanced at his palm, wondering if such a grand ambition was merely a piece of desperate local folklore. Suddenly, a massive, scarred man interjected, roaring that the legend was gospel and that he had witnessed such a transformation with his own eyes. The staffer gasped as the man, Madsen, stomped forward, bellowing that he would sooner embrace the grave than die without achieving the rank of mage. The veteran hunter clapped a heavy hand on the youth's head, offering a rough, toothy apology for his sudden intrusion. Intrigued, the protagonist ignored the man's size and pressed him for the grisly details of how one evolves through the slaughter of beasts. Sighing at their intensity, the girl rationalized that if mages feast on mana to grow, it was only logical that hunters could do the same. Madsen revealed that he and his band of mercenaries were purging the outskirts for the sole purpose of awakening their dormant magical potential. The youth asked if any among them had actually succeeded, and Madsen admitted only 4 true mages currently resided within the city's walls. The giant then scanned the boy's simple attire, skeptically asking if he even carried a steel blade capable of drawing monster blood. In response, our hero produced his weathered sling, and the hunter's eyes widened as he noted the weapon was scarred by countless battles. The veteran weighed the tool, remarking that while it looked lethal, it seemed better suited for culling small game like rabbits or foxes. He then revealed his squad was down a marksman and, impressed by the boy's aura, invited him to join their dangerous crusade. The protagonist offered nothing but a faint, enigmatic smile to the hunter's sudden offer before politely declining the partnership. A short while later, he was sprawled across his meager bed, finally allowing the fatigue of the journey to seep into his bones. Staring blankly at the timber ceiling, the young man replayed a day that had been far more chaotic than he ever anticipated. His gaze drifted to his pack. He still found it surreal that he had actually crossed the threshold of his village into the wide world. He wondered what trials awaited him at dawn, his hands suddenly pulsing with a rhythmic, azure glow of raw mana. His internal musings were shattered by 2 sharp, deliberate knocks echoing against his chamber door. He sat bolt upright, his muscles coiling with instant tension as he demanded to know who dared disturb his rest. A memory of the old swordsman surged back, a stern warning never to lower his guard, not even in the supposed safety of an inn. The veteran had hammered into him that within city walls, the monsters wore human faces and walked the streets in broad daylight. Heeding that mental echo, the hero channeled his focus, acknowledging that a moment's lapse in vigilance could be his last. Back in the present, the youth gathered his mana into his fingertips, approaching the door with the predatory caution of a cornered wolf. He cracked the door just a fraction, peeking through the sliver of space to identify the intruder while staying hidden in the shadows. His eyes were pools of absolute concentration, dissecting the visitor's intent before he committed to an opening. To his bewilderment, it was only Lena, the waitress, who beamed and asked if he was still awake. The hero was stunned as she purred, that she had come to provide some warmth, claiming she couldn't bear the thought of him shivering in the night air. The young man asked for clarification, and the girl's eyes took on a sharp, provocative glint as she stepped closer. She told him her meaning was as clear as day, standing in the doorway with an alluring, well-rehearsed poise. The young woman offered her services in exchange for a few coins, but he challenged her, asking what the price of a refusal would be. The girl leaned in until he could smell her perfume, whispering that his stoic face couldn't hide the natural fire of a young man. Instead of yielding, the protagonist simply closed his eyes and assumed the rigid, unshakable expression of a mountain monk. The waitress stood there, completely flabbergasted and robbed of words by the boy's unexpected, iron-willed dismissal. Another vivid flash of the old mage's face appeared in his mind, the veteran screaming at him with desperate, wide-eyed intensity. The swordsman had warned him to steer clear of such night blossoms, fearing the boy would contract a disease far more lethal than any monster's venom. In the quiet of the night, the young man replayed his master's stern decree: never allow fleeting desire to derail your destiny. With an indignant huff, the girl stormed away, leaving our hero to conclude that surviving the urban jungle would be a brutal ordeal. Collapsing onto his bed, he mused that between the greedy merchant and the bold Lena, cities were proving to be remarkably cold places. Meanwhile, in a shadowy corner of the tavern, one of the veteran monster hunters approached his superior with a skeptical frown. He questioned why the leader was so intent on recruiting the rookie, arguing that a kid with a sling would only be a liability in a real fight. Midden countered with a cynical smirk, suggesting the boy's arrogant streak would make him the perfect sacrificial bait for a monster. In private, however, the youth's fire reminded Midden of his own past, and he was secretly troubled by the boy's lackluster equipment. The veteran figured that if the greenhorn clung to his side, he might actually stand a ghost of a chance at surviving the week. Stretched out on his mattress, the protagonist allowed a faint, knowing smile to graze his lips as the conversation leaked through the thin walls. He realized with a start that perhaps the city wasn't the heartless void of ice he had first perceived it to be. At dawn, the young man marched toward the imposing grandeur of City Hall to officially ignite his career as a mercenary. Stepping inside, he was met by a weary clerk who offered a hollow greeting, inquiring how he could possibly assist a wanderer today. The hero asked if he was speaking to a man of authority, and the official snapped back, asking if his uniform looked like a jester's outfit. The youth cut through the snark, declaring his intent to hunt the monsters plaguing the region, catching the official completely off guard. In that moment, the shepherd recalled the veteran's grim prophecy: the world has no natural inclination toward kindness. The old mage had explained that while the world owes no one a favor, there was a foolproof method to command the respect of others. His master had urged him to eventually unveil his identity as a mage, knowing that commoners only bow to those with overwhelming power. Back in the present, the clerk shoved a weathered parchment across the desk, an official request for a monster's head. He barked a warning that the boy couldn't keep the bounty poster. He was to memorize the details and return it immediately. Examining the sketch, the hero asked if the target was a crow, and the man sneered, asking if he mistook the feathered beast for a house cat. The official warned that the carcass must be recovered. If the mana isn't ritually purged, the remains manifest into a lethal phantom. The protagonist replied coolly that he was well aware. Abandoning the corpse of a magical beast was a crime punishable by the gallows. Recalling the horrors of the past, he made a silent, ironclad vow never to repeat such a catastrophic oversight. The boy then asked if the city's knights participated in the culling, but the clerk scoffed, saying they had far more noble duties. He explained that a knight's sole purpose was to uphold the Lord's law within the walls, not to soil their capes hunting beasts in the wild. With a look of pure elitist disdain, the official remarked that such filthy work was reserved for expendables like him. As the youth turned to leave, the clerk watched his retreating back, mentally adding another name to the pile of corpses rotting in the woods. Suddenly, the severed eye of a crow monster snapped open, burning with a ferocious, vengeful malevolence. But the nightmare was over. The creature lay lifeless on the cold hall floor, a cavernous wound torn through its chest. The city hall staff stood paralyzed, their faces pale with shock as they struggled to process the impossible sight before them. A wave of awe swept the room. The hero had returned with the beast's carcass at a speed that defied all logic. The boy confirmed with terrifying calm that he had slaughtered the creature single-handedly and demanded his hard-earned reward. The official began to stutter, frantically assuring the boy that his payment would be processed with the utmost urgency. The man handed over a heavy pouch of gold, practically pleading with the boy to go find an inn and rest his weary bones. Nearby, the examiners picked over the remains, stunned that the delicate wings were preserved in such pristine condition. One of the bureaucrats noticed the protagonist hadn't budged an inch, standing like a statue in the center of the hall. The desk clerk peered over his spectacles, asking why on earth he was still here instead of celebrating at the local tavern. The hero's question sent a chill through the room. Are there any other monsters in this territory worth my time? The clerk was flabbergasted. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that the boy was already hungry for a fresh slaughter. The scene shifts to the inn's finest table, groaning under the weight of a royal feast as Lena serves the most expensive delicacies on the menu. She gasped, admitting she never imagined a lone traveler could exterminate 30 high-tier monsters in a mere 3 days. She remarked that he must be swimming in gold, watching with a mixture of awe and joy as the young hero devoured his meal. But the boy paused, his eyes narrowing as he replied that gold was merely a side effect of his true journey. He explained that his real quarry was the monster's mana. Through their systematic slaughter, his own power had reached new heights. The protagonist sensed his internal mana reservoir had expanded exponentially since his fateful encounter with the veteran knight. However, he felt a looming plateau. He knew he couldn't reach the next stage of evolution by feeding on the scraps of weaklings. The waitress stood by, her head spinning as she tried to decode the boy's cryptic, high-level ambitions. Both the innkeeper and the girl stared at the decimated table, stunned that a single person had polished off a feast meant for 5. The owner noted that for such a slender lad, he ate like a starving giant, while Lena beamed, just happy to see him satisfied. The hero offered a polite thanks, but as he moved to depart, a towering figure stepped into his path, cutting off his escape. A massive, calloused hand clamped onto the protagonist's shoulder, wrenching him backward. A pack of low-life thugs loomed over him, sneering at his meal and mockingly labeling the youth a scrawny beanpole. The leader spat that word had reached them about the kid's sudden, overflowing fortune. With a predatory grin, the thug suggested the boy show some brotherly charity before launching a heavy-handed slap. The protagonist caught the blow with effortless precision, leaving his attacker frozen in wide-eyed disbelief. Maintaining a mask of icy calm, the hero sardonically inquired if the brute was truly that desperate for a handout. Veins bulging in rage, the thug roared for him to shut his mouth, winding up a haymaker packed with murderous intent. The boy ducked the clumsy strike and countered with a devastating blow that sent the aggressor hurtling through the air. Seeing his comrade fall, another thug hoisted a heavy wooden chair and charged like a madman. The youth shattered the incoming furniture with a single, casual backhand. Then, with lightning speed, he firmly pinched the second attacker's cheek, halting his momentum instantly. A blinding spark of mana ignited in his fingertips, and the thug collapsed into a heap on the floor, his nervous system fried. Lena, the waitress, marched into the fray with a strained, dangerous smile, demanding an end to the chaos. She let out a piercing shriek, declaring that anyone who spilled blood in her and would answer to her personally. Moments later, the bruised thugs were lined up, bowing their heads in a pathetic display of genuine contrition. Back in the hero's quarters, Midden sighed, swearing on his honor that his subordinates would never cross that line again. He confessed they were drowning in debt, and that the sight of the boy's success had sparked a moment of blind envy. The two goons stammered out their apologies, their voices trembling after witnessing the boy's true power. The boy asked if their situation was truly that dire, and the hunter admitted they were staring into the abyss. Midden clenched his fist, muttering that he'd find the rent in 3 days' time, insisting it was a burden he had to carry alone. With a subtle flick of his wrist, the protagonist tossed a heavy pouch of gold toward the startled monster hunter. As Midden gaped, the hero explained it was a consultation fee for the kindness and the invitation he'd offered earlier. Midden asked how he knew their exact needs, but the boy simply replied that nothing in this world comes without a price. He demanded information in trade, and the hunter eagerly agreed, boasting that secrets were his most valuable stock. The scene pans out, showcasing the sprawling rooftops and winding alleys of Murai City. Perched on a jagged cliffside, the hero checked his gear, sensing that his time in this city had reached its natural end. He mused that Midden's intelligence on the neighboring provinces was the final piece he needed to move on. Reflecting on the trade, he decided that Midden was a rare breed, a man of genuine, unpolished honor. He compared the hunter to CEO Roni, noting that while Midden lacked the knight's prestige, his soul was pure and far kinder. Suddenly, the protagonist's pupils dilated as his gaze locked onto a disturbance in the distance. Utilizing his supernatural sense of smell, he caught a whiff of a familiar and deeply nauseating scent on the breeze. Praying his intuition was wrong, he blurred into motion, sprinting through the thicket with feline grace. Deep in the woods, he found massive, jagged claw marks gouged into a trunk, whispering of a brutal struggle. With a face like stone, the hero began tracking the fresh trail of carnage through the dense undergrowth. Suddenly, he stumbled into a clearing and recoiled at a horrific sight, a man mangled beyond recognition. He instantly recognized the tattered gear of Midden's crew, with a cold, analytical gaze. The mage surveyed the slaughter, mentally reconstructing the final moments of the fallen hunters. The victim's eyes were glassy and hollow, confirming that life had fled his broken body long ago. Beside the corpse, several silver coins lay scattered, glistening under a fresh coat of brilliant crimson. Crouching low, the protagonist wondered what kind of nightmare could have decimated Midden's veteran team. A sudden wheeze caught his ear, and he found another survivor slumped against a tree, clinging to a thread of life. With his dying breath, the man managed to hiss the word rabbit, a term that left the boy momentarily baffled. A grotesque image of a leopard beast with gore dripping from its maw flashed across his mind's eye. Looking around at the increasing body count, he realized they were all the prey of a single, apex predator. Out of the shadows emerged a twisted creature, a giant rabbit with blood-red eyes and obsidian horns. The protagonist spun on his heel, his aura flaring as he prepared to confront the murderous abomination. Without a sound, the beast lunged, closing the distance with a speed that defied the laws of physics. The boy was rocked by the creature's sheer velocity, his reflexes pushed to their absolute limit to track the blur. He rolled clear just as the beast landed, its hateful red eyes locked onto him with a hunger for slaughter. Channeling a surge of mana, he slammed an air barrier into existence, bracing for the next lethal impact. With a sharp flick of his wrist, the protagonist conjured a lethal surge of atmospheric pressure. He unleashed a whistling blade of compressed wind, aimed directly at the beast's jugular. The gale struck true, but the rabbit defied physics, twisting its body to blunt the impact. The monstrosity lashed out with a whip-like tail, shattering the boy's air barrier into translucent shards. The hero's eyes narrowed, realizing this apex predator was a veteran at neutralizing projectile sorcery. With a thunderous stomp that cracked the earth, the rabbit lunged, intent on pulping the young mage. The beast soared into the heavens before plummeting like a meteor, channeling its entire weight into a final, crushing descent. With irises burning like twin hellfires, the creature locked its predatory gaze onto the boy below. But the youth blurred aside at the penultimate second, leaving the monster to crater the empty soil. Refusing to relent, the abomination pivoted instantly, kick-starting a high-speed pursuit through the brush. The hero closed the gap in a heartbeat, detonating a raw mana burst directly into the rabbit's snarl. The creature let out a blood-curdling shriek of agony, giving the protagonist a window to reset his stance. He vaulted backward, putting much-needed distance between them to orchestrate his next lethal maneuver. Suddenly, the monster's fur bristled as a crown of jagged golden energy enveloped its entire frame. The beast erupted forward once more, its velocity reaching a terrifying, sonic threshold. With a flicker of movement, the rabbit exploited its sheer momentum to manifest a phalanx of deceptive afterimages. It tore through the forest in a chaotic zigzag, weaving a web of motion designed to shatter the boy's aim. The collision of forces kicked up a choking shroud of dust, veiling the battlefield in a gray, impenetrable haze. Deep within the gloom, the monster roared in primal fury, splintering ancient trees even as its own strength began to wane. Crimson streaks painted the forest floor as blood seeped from its mangled haunches and spine. Foaming with gore and malice, the monstrous leopard finally collapsed, its life snuffed out by the young man's tenacity. As the echoes of battle faded, the protagonist stood tall in the carnage, mentally bracing for the next phase of his ascension. He stalked toward the cooling carcass, ready to harvest the high-density mana locked within its flesh. Without a moment's hesitation, the hero extended his palm to initiate the soul-draining ritual. A titanic torrent of emerald energy erupted from the corpse, spiraling into the youth's waiting veins. He gasped, sensing that this creature's essence was exponentially more potent than the leopard he had slain before. The sheer volume of power was intoxicating. The young man could scarcely fathom the staggering upgrade to his core. In the wreckage, the dying hunter gasped out the word mage, a title that struck the boy like a physical blow. The hero offered a grim confirmation, prompting the man to cough out a question about why a god would hide among sheep. With salt-streaked cheeks, the hunter lamented that their brotherhood had no kin to inherit their meager, earthly remains. His dying thoughts drifted to his fallen captain, Medon, and the impossible dream they had nurtured together. A vision surfaced of Medon describing Aurum, a legendary citadel housing a library that touched the clouds. He had spoken with a dreamer's smile of a sanctuary where thousands of volumes held the secrets of the universe. The boy remembered the moment his curiosity had finally piqued, asking Medon how one might gain entry to such a holy place. The hunter had chuckled sadly, admitting that its gates were barred to the common and the lowborn. He revealed that only those recognized as mages could cross that threshold, a fact that etched itself into the hero's soul. Back in the grim reality of the forest, The hunter whispered a final question, confused by the resolve in the boy's eyes. The hero stood firm, declaring his pilgrimage to the great spires of Orem, the dream Medon never lived to see. Gazing at the fresh mounds of earth, he bid a somber farewell to his fallen comrades, his heart heavy with their legacy. He turned his back on the graves, whispering a prayer for Medon's peace as he set his sights on the horizon. After weeks of trekking through the wilds, the young man finally stood before a sprawling ocean of stone and humanity. Looking at the sheer majesty before him, he felt a sting of embarrassment for ever being impressed by the backwater alleys of Murai. A towering monolith confirmed his arrival. Orem, the jewel of the kingdom and a hive of infinite ambition. The scale of the crowd was overwhelming. He took his place in the endless serpentine line, snaking toward the iron gates. Observing the steel-clad sentries, the hero wondered if they were hunting for outlaws or simply maintaining the city's rigid order. Everything here whispered of a much more sophisticated and ruthless security apparatus. Suddenly, a guard's bark command cut through the air, bringing the youth to an abrupt, confused halt. With a sneer of pure aristocratic loathing, the sentry pointed a gauntlet at the boy, barring his path. The guard spat that Orem was no place for filth, ordering the stinking peasant to scrub the grime from his soul before daring to enter. Once past the threshold, the boy's breath caught. Looming over the skyline was the great library, a majestic, ivory spire of infinite knowledge. Staring up at the towering spire, he recalled how often Medon's eyes had lit up whenever he spoke of this sanctuary. The hero stood mesmerized by the architectural marvel, wondering if such impossible heights were held together by ancient sorcery. Steel-toed boots echoing on the marble, he approached the threshold, immediately drawing the wary gaze of the two elite sentries. The youth declared his intent to enter, but a guard stepped forward with a sneer, barking that these halls were a sanctum for mages alone. Without a word of protest, the protagonist ignited his aura, revealing his status as a mage and leaving the sentries paralyzed in shock. The guard's face contorted in fury, demanding to know if the boy had a death wish for daring to impersonate a sorcerer in his presence. He snarled that a filthy wanderer could never possess the gift, reaching out to violently shove the boy from the steps. But the protagonist's palm suddenly erupted with a crimson mana, the sheer heat of the energy leaving the guard breathless. A fragment of the veteran's wisdom echoed in his mind, that true mages can read one another as easily as an open book. He had taught him that by resonating with the flow of mana, a caster can instinctively measure the terrifying gap in their power. The protagonist's irises bled into a predatory red, mirrored by a fierce and suffocating surge of scarlet energy. With a thunderous hum, the guard was hurled backward, sent tumbling by the sheer gravitational pressure of the boy's raw power. Hitting the cobblestones with a groan, the man waved off his comrade's help, his arrogance completely shattered. He looked up in terror, realizing this was no mere apprentice, but a high-born prodigy whose pedigree likely eclipsed his own. The sentry scrambled to his feet, identifying himself as a knight of House Bantus before humbly inquiring which great lineage the boy represented. The hero asked if a family name was the price of admission, to which the guard stammered that it wasn't a strict requirement for a mage. However, he cautioned that the library's secrets were governed by the iron will of the master of House Banter. The knight promised to relay the request to the high nobles, and soon, the young man found himself submerged in a steaming, opulent bath. Submerged in luxury, the youth let out a tired sigh, having expected a far more direct path to the knowledge he sought. A soft rustle announced the arrival of a maid, who watched the mysterious young guest with a flush of shy fascination. A trio of attendants began to meticulously wait on him, though the protagonist clearly felt suffocated by such unwanted attention. He groaned internally, wondering how a simple quest for books had devolved into three young girls awkwardly tending to his bath. The hero commanded them to cease their ministrations, prompting a synchronized, submissive chorus of "Yes, my lord." One maid trembled, explaining that failing to provide absolute service to a guest of his stature would result in a brutal punishment. Relenting out of pity, he told them to finish their task, and the girls bowed in deep, visible relief. Once the steam cleared, one of the maids stood frozen, utterly captivated by the young man's ethereal and striking appearance. She frantically pressed a hand to her mouth, mortified that her heart had skipped a beat so visibly. Now draped in fine silks, the hero caught her staring and asked if the grime of the road still clung to his face. The girl stammered an apology, confessing she had lost herself for a moment in the noble guest's undeniable grace. With a soft chuckle, he dismissed her concerns, gently asking that they drop the suffocating formalities and speak freely. The hero caught his reflection in a gilded mirror and paused, barely recognizing the refined warrior staring back at him. Suddenly, the heavy doors swung open as a vibrant, red-haired girl swept into the room, her eyes dancing with intense curiosity. She smirked playfully, teasing him about the nameless beggar who had caused such a stir at the front gates. With a mischievous grin, she noted that a bit of soap and silk had transformed the stray dog into a literal prince. The youth introduced himself as Turan, and the girl countered with her own title, Azella, a highborn lady of the reigning house. She pressed him for his family name, but the young man maintained a wall of silence, refusing to divulge his origins. Azella's smile turned sharp and mysterious, musing that a man with no history was a puzzle she was dying to solve. If he insisted on playing the part of a phantom, she decided it was only fair to test the weight of his mask with the game. In a heartbeat, a cataclysmic explosion of orange mana flooded the hall, the heat of the flare catching the young man completely off guard. With a wild, predatory look in her eyes, the red-haired noblewoman challenged him to show her the true depth of his soul. She demanded he unleash his power to match her own, as Turan struggled to steady himself against the suffocating pressure of her royal aura.